Your test is going to have 14 questions. Your quiz had 10, and you had 35 minutes. So your test is 14, and you have 50 minutes. You have plenty of time to finish all the questions. Some of the questions say solve. That means do whatever you want to do. Some of them say solve by, completing the square, factoring, whatever. Whatever the directions say to do is what you need to do. But if it says solve, you can do whatever you choose. Quadratic formula, completing the square, whatever. But what is the best and easiest way to solve any of these quadratics? No. Factoring. If something factors, that's the fastest way to do it. Now, some of you, like in this one, number 1, all right, this is a quadratic, it's x squared. So we need to move 4 over here. 5x squared minus 12x plus 4 equals 0. All right, this tells you to solve by factoring. That means it's going to factor. Some of you, you think you like the way that I do it, so then you did it, but you keep forgetting to divide by the a term, so then your factors aren't right. So let me show you. I'm going to go both ways. I'll show you the mistake that some people made. So 5 times 4 is 20. What are the factors of 20 that multiply to give me 20, but add to give me a negative 12? So x minus 10, x minus 2. A lot of people got that, and then they told me their answer was x equals 10 and x equals 2. Is that correct? No, that's not factored, guys. X times x does not equal 5x squared. If you're going to use the trick, then you have to do it correctly. If you've figured out the 2 factors, great, but then you have to divide by the a term. Some of you forgot to do that. Well, that's not the right answer. So you need to make sure that you factor correctly. If you want to do it my way, that's perfectly fine, but you have to do it right. You can't just do it halfway and do it wrong and then be like, oh, I did it right. Your 2x values here are 2 and positive 2/5. If you don't like doing it that way, that's fine. You can do it the grouping method. 5x squared minus the one term we found was negative 10. The other one we found was negative 2. And then you complete the problem. So plus 4. Some of you, if it led with a negative, you didn't factor out the negative. Then you got your signs all wrong. If you're not going to follow the little steps that I've told you to kind of negate these errors, you guys are going to keep making the same errors and getting points off. But if we do it this grouping method, what can I take out of 5x squared and a negative 10? X. 5x, okay. So I take out my 5x and I'm left with x minus 2. What can I take out of negative 2x and a positive 4? Negative 2. Then I'm left with x minus 2. So here, 5x minus 2 gets its own parenthesis. X minus 2 gets one parenthesis. And then you solve. You get x equals 2/5 and x equals 2. Same thing. Same thing here. If you're going to do it the top way, where you just find the factors and then divide by the a term, you have to remember, you're fine. No, I got you. You have to remember to divide by the a term. Very important. All right, look at the next one. What's the problem? What's your initial issue? It's not in what? We're not in standard form. We need to rewrite so everything is in standard form. Get into the habit of doing that. All right, this tells you to factor. How do we factor when there's 4 terms? Group. All right, there's no GCF, so you group the first 2, you group the second 2. What can I take out of 5x cubed and 3x squared?
X squared.
X squared, good. We're left with 5x, what? Okay, plus 3. What can I take out of negative 20x and a negative 12? Negative 4, and we're left with 5x plus 3. That means we grouped it properly because this is the new GCF. I have 5x plus 3 in one parenthesis, and I have x squared minus 4 in another. Now, you guys could solve from this point. How many answers should we have? 3. What's the highest exponent? 3. This is why I don't think it's a good idea to solve from this point, because a lot of you would tell me x squared minus 4 equals 0. You'll solve it. You'll tell me x equals 2. Is that the case? No. X equals what? 2 and negative 2. I would factor everything completely. What can I break this down into? X plus 2 and x minus 2. Good. And now you see, oh, wait, I have 3 answers. I said each parenthesis equal to 0. So here, I get x equals what? Negative 3/5. I get x equals positive 2, and x equals negative 2. The highest exponent tells you how many answers you should have, guys. Remember that. But if the problem tells you solve by factoring, you've got to go back to factoring and say, okay, is it in standard form? Is everything on one side set equal to 0? Is there a GCF? And then if it is 2 terms, is it difference of squares? If it's difference of cubes. 3 terms, is it a trinomial? 4 terms, do I group? All of those things, we've got to make sure that we're remembering. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you wanted to put x equals plus or minus 2, that's fine. Just make sure you have that plus and minus because there's 2 answers there. All right, let's move along. Solve using the square root method. It tells you what to do. So guys, let's think about this for a second. If there was a number here, say there was a 4 here, can I take the square root? No, you have to isolate the binomial first. You have to get rid of anything that's being multiplied, divided, anything like that before you take the square root. A lot of you guys made that mistake. But since my binomial is isolated, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I have 3x plus 5 equals, what goes in front of my root 48? Plus or minus. Yes, come on in, bud. You're okay. All right, now, where people made mistakes. At this point, we had people divide by 3, then subtract 5. Is that the correct order of operations? No. We need to subtract 5 first. So I have 3x equals, I like to write negative 5 plus minus root 48. If you want to write the root 48 first, it's fine. And then we divide by 3. So x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 48 over 3. Is that complete? No. What can I do with 48? 16 times 3, right? So this is x equals negative 5 plus or minus 4 square roots of 3 over 3. Can you write it separated? Absolutely. If you want to, you can say negative 5 over 3 plus minus 4 root 3 over 3. Same thing. You don't have to, though. There's nothing to simplify, so either way, I'll write an or here, whatever you want to do. Questions? Yep. All right, let's look at 4. Lots of people made mistakes here. I want to go through where different errors were made so you guys don't make these same errors. Is there an x to the first power here? No, you have x squared, and then you just have a constant. So it's not that you can factor using a trinomial or anything like that. This isn't the difference of squares. You guys need to understand how to solve a question like this. When you have just x squared, you need to isolate it. I'm going to add 8 to both sides. So we have 5x squared equals 8. Can I take the square root right now? No. X squared has to be isolated first. So I need to divide both sides by what? 5, okay? So now x squared is isolated. Now we can take the square root. Okay, what we need to understand here, God bless you, when you take the square root, guys, if you don't have a perfect square in the denominator, you can't just leave this as plus or minus the square root of 8 over 5. That is not even close to complete for an answer. This is x equals plus or minus the square root of 8 over the square root of 5. Some of you left it right there just like that. That's worth maybe 3 points. You have to understand that you can break down radicals. You can't leave radicals in the denominator, all that stuff. So what do I have to do here to complete this problem? Well, I'm going to rationalize top and bottom by the square root of 5. Perfect. So I have plus or minus. What's 8 times 5? So square root of 40 over 5. Is that done? No. 40 breaks into what? 2 root 10. So it's x equals plus or minus 2 square roots of 10 over 5. Some of you got there, forgot the plus or minus. That's forgetting half of the answer. You've got to remember all those little things. But you have to isolate x squared before you take the square root. Very, very, very important. Questions? Everybody okay? Again, 14 questions on your test on Thursday. Some will say solve for x. Some will say solve by completing the square, using the quadratic formula. Factoring, you have to follow the directions. If you do it a different way to check, that's fine. If it says to use the quadratic formula, but you're like, well, I want to complete the square, that's fine for checking purposes, but you have to show the method that is asked on those specific questions. So, yeah, 14.
Oh, and how many say like a specific way to solve?
I'm not sure. All right, solve using what, guys? Quadratic formula, okay? Solve using the quadratic formula. We talked about a few pointers yesterday. The first thing, and some of you are trying to do like 3 and 4 things in one step, and that's where you're confusing yourself too. But in order to solve using the quadratic formula, everything needs to be on one side of the equal sign, correct? So I'm going to go ahead and move. So I have x squared minus 1/3 x minus 4 equals 0. Now what can I do to simplify this problem for myself? Multiply. I'm going to multiply the entire equation by what? 3. Let's get rid of that denominator. So I have 3x squared minus what? Minus x minus 12 equals 0. So now can you identify your A, B, and C terms? Yes. A is 3, B is -1, and C is -12. Write that out so you don't forget a negative sign somewhere. And then when we fill in, I have negative b. So -1 plus or minus the square root of -1 squared minus 4 times 3 times -12 all over 2 times 3. Now, should we get a negative underneath our radical? Yes or no? No. Starting Friday, yes. But on your test, no. So if you did, go back and check. You missed a negative sign somewhere. So as we simplify this, minus a negative is a +1, plus or minus, what's -1 squared? 1, plus -4 times 3, -12 times -12 is 144, good, over 6. So I have 1 plus or minus the square root of 145 over 6. The last thing I need to do is see if 145 does what? See if it breaks down. Start with your smallest prime number, 2. Does 2 go into 145? No. What about 3? 1 plus 4 is 5 plus 5 is 10. No. What about 5? Okay, 5 goes into 14. How many times? Twice. Good. With how many left over? 4. So then 5 goes into 45. How many times? 9. Is 29 going to break down at all? Is there a perfect square hidden inside of 145? No. So there we go. There's your answer. If you want to write it separately, you can. 1 over 6 plus or minus root 145 over 6. That's fine. Or you can leave it just like that. All right. Let's look at the next one. Can I just go ahead and say what A, B, and C are right now? No, I need to go ahead and take 4 and move it to this side. So I have 2x squared minus 3x minus 4 equals 0. So my A term is 2, my B term is -3, and my C term is -4. Everybody with me? Okay, so let's go ahead. X equals -3 plus or minus, I have the square root. -3 squared minus 4 times A is 2. C is -4. All over 2 times 2. So simplify. Minus a negative is going to give me +3. Plus or minus, what's -3 squared? 9. And then -4 times 2. -8 times -4. Plus 32 all over 4. So x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 41 over 4. Is any perfect squares hidden inside of 41? No? There you go. That's it. And that is it. All right, and lastly, we're going to solve by completing the square. Some of you did really great job on this. Some of you not so much. Let's try not to skip steps, all right? We do not want to skip steps. We want to make sure that we don't miss signs. We don't make any silly mistakes. So the first thing I look at when it says to complete the square is I have to have a positive 1 as my coefficient of x squared, correct? So what do I need to divide everything by? 2. I'm going to divide everything by 2. I'm not moving anything anywhere, nothing. I'm just dividing out a 2. So I'm left with x squared minus 3x minus 15 over 2 equals 0. Now, in order to complete the square, we write our x squared and our x to the first power, and then we put a big old box. What do I do with negative 15 over 2? I'm going to move it to the other side, so it becomes positive 15 over 2 plus the big old box. What you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So to complete the square, we take our b term, which is negative 3, and I divide it by 2. That is what goes in your parenthesis with x. So you should have x minus 3 over 2. Watch your sign, guys. The whole problem, your b term is negative, so you should have a minus sign in your parentheses. So we square it. How do I know what goes in the box? 3 over 2 squared, which is 9 over 4. Good, 9 over 4. Now, before we can add those two, we have to get a common what? Common denominator. What's the common denominator between 2 and 4? 4. So if I multiply the bottom by 2, I get 4. So if I multiply the top by 2, I get 30. So when I add these together, I get 39 over what? Perfect. And then what do we do to solve? Take what? Take the square root of both sides. Perfect. So what goes in front of my answer? Plus or minus. Do we know the square root of 39? Is there a perfect square hidden inside there that we can take out? No. But do we know the square root of 4? What is it? Perfect. And then what's your last step? Add the 3 over 2. So x equals, I like to put the number first and then the plus or minus root. You could do it the other way if you want. You can also write it together. 3 plus or minus the square root of 39 over 2. Either way, totally fine. Some of you moved the whole moved a constant to the other side, and instead of subtracting it, you added it. You know, just little stuff like that that really makes a huge impact on the answer. So you got to make sure you're following.
Can you have plus or minus this third again plus 3?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Plus 3?
Plus 3 over 2.
Yeah, that's fine. You can write it. Some of you like to do this. Plus or minus the square root of 39 over 2 plus 3 over 2. That's fine. I don't know why, I just don't like the way that looks. But that's just me. All right, let's do the last one. What's the problem? Everything's on one side set equal to 0, but what's the issue? What is the constant? -5. So what do I have to do with that? Divide everything by -5. Guys, if you mess a sign up right here, the whole problem is messed up. Pay attention. What's a negative divided by a negative? Positive, okay? So I have x squared plus 2x plus 3 over 5 equals 0. Now we are set up already to complete the square. So x squared plus 2x plus my big old square equals, when positive 3/5 goes to the other side of the equal sign, what does it become? -3/5. Perfect. And what you do to one side, you do to the other. So if I'm adding a big square on the left, I have to add a big square on the right. Now, what is the process for completing the square? Remind me again. Take your b term and do what? Divide it by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. So what goes in my parenthesis with my x? X plus 1. Perfect. Squared. And then what goes in both of the boxes? A 1. Good. What do I have to do first with my -3/5, my whole number 1, before I can combine them? Common denominator. What's the common denominator between 5 and 1? So this is 5 over 5. You guys agree? Okay. So -3 plus 5 is, so 2/5. Good. Now what? Take the square root. Perfect. Guys, watch, watch, watch. X plus 1 equals, I have plus or minus. Do we know the square root of 2? No? Okay. Do we know the square root of 5? No. Before you do anything else, what do I have to take care of?
Multiply the bottom by 5.
I got to rationalize. I have to rationalize here by the square root. Good. So I have x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 10 over
5.
perfect. And then my last step. Subtract 1. Okay, here's another place where people made silly mistakes. This is negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 10 over 5. Does the negative 1 have a denominator of 5? No. Some of you went something like this. Those two things, these two, are not the same. If you wanted to write with a common denominator, what would this look like? Negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 10 over 5. Because negative 5 over 5 is the same thing as negative 1. So please understand the difference, guys. If you are not sure, don't try to oversimplify. Do not try to do too much because, again, that's another area that we fall into. We made another mistake when you can't do that. So just be careful. All right, so my suggestion to you, I'm going to give your quizzes back here in a minute. Ask me anything, it's fine, but you're not allowed to say what? I'm stupid. You're not. You guys are making silly mistakes, but none of you are stupid. You guys are all very, very bright, and I want you guys to fix these things, all right? I want you to end with a really good grade on this test. But rework any of the problems that you got wrong. If you don't see your mistakes, ask a friend, ask me, whatever you need. But rework those problems to make sure you understand, because this whole test is just solving. That's it. Everything we've been going over and over and over. Tonight, work on the review. Ask me questions tomorrow in class. I will answer anything. If you have stuff from WebAssign, whatever, just come with questions.